Hello, we are back for the third episode of ForResting the Soul with Christy, and I am sitting here with my father, Robert Peterson, and it seems like it has been a little bit of a journey to get here. We are recording on a Wednesday morning when we have actually usually been doing these on Saturday mornings, and for some of my Kansas City friends who are going to be tuning in, they were expecting us to drop this episode on Saturday. And gosh, Dad, we had a little journey going up and down to St. Louis, didn't we?
Did.
Yeah, so Dad had a follow-up appointment at Barnes Jewish Hospital last Thursday. And so we drove up and had a lovely time together. And not even 5 miles away from the hospital, your vehicle, your vehicle decided it wanted to overheat. And so we thought quick on our feet and we came up with a plan. And luckily there was a mechanic shop nearby, like within a mile, dropped it, got a rental car. Thank goodness for modern technology, right?
Yeah, I'm kidding. We worked together as a team on that one.
We did. So anyway, instead of getting to record our podcast on Saturday, we got to go back to St. Louis. And, it was such a beautiful experience and reminder of how life happens for us, not to us. I had been introduced, a good friend of mine, Josh, had introduced me to Paul Chek, actually, and so Dad and I got to listen to Paul Chek podcasts
and expand our mind.
We did. Oh my goodness, he, out of all the pages I follow on Instagram and stuff, I'm surprised I hadn't ever heard of him, but he is a remarkable practitioner, teacher, student of life.
Student of life.
Yeah. And so, Dad and I ate that up. We got to listen to that podcast and bounce things off of each other from past and future stuff.
Kind of like a smorgasbord of life.
That's right. Yeah. Now we're sitting here with our cacao, and oh gosh, it was a beautiful little start to our session, having some quiet time and finding our breath and giving thanks to all of the beautiful souls that enabled this cacao to get all the way from Guatemala to us here in Springfield, Missouri. And so it's been a beautiful, slow and meaningful start to what's going to be a very meaningful podcast today.
Yes, it is.
Just to recap for those of you who maybe didn't hear episode 2, which was What Makes Us Us. And we are breaking down Dad's book that he is writing into a podcast, and each episode is a different chapter. And so that was his chapter 2, is really getting into and discussing over time what makes us who we are and what defines our body, what we start to kind of feel into and get into this 3D world around us. And as we got to talking, a big part of the story last time was, it became about the fire. And because that really, at 11 years old, set a big tone for the course of your life. And so we got into kind of how the fire started and your experience, as an 11-year-old boy in the basement by himself, the pilot light on the water heater ignited and fumes were present. And, you can get more of those details by tuning into the last episode. But, imagine yourself being 11 years old and looking down a hallway and seeing, was it blue flames? Is that what you said?
No, they were yellow. They were
yellow.
Mostly yellow. Yeah, they sure were.
Yeah, rolling at you and then having to navigate that. And so this episode 3, titled The Fire, was already part of the plan to really get into all of the aspects of that experience for you, because it wasn't just about how it started and navigating your way out of the house, because there were years years of recovery from that experience.
Yeah.
I mean, what was it? 3/4 of your body was actually burned. Is that right?
90%.
90%.
90%. First, second, and third, and fourth.
Wow.
Degree. Yeah.
Yeah.
The fourth degree is when it burns your skin completely off and burns into the muscle. I had a lot of second degree burn also. Oddly enough, the second degree burn felt worse than the fourth degree burn because all of the nerve endings were gone.
Yeah. Yeah, so you just didn't feel it. It just looked really rough because before the skin grafts and everything.
Yeah.
So where did they take, I mean, I kind of know this from the scars on your legs that I've seen growing up, but where did they take the skin from?
The first skin graft, which was for the back of my right arm, was taken off my butt.
Okay, well, I haven't seen that one. That's why I said legs.
But they took about 2 inches wide and about 10 inches long.
Wow.
And put that on my back of my arm, and I had to be real still for a long time so that it would heal and grow to my muscle. And I always used to kid people before when I was younger, don't pat me on the back of the right arm because you'll be patting my butt.
That's just like you to always make something funny. I love that.
But,
would you say that was probably the most challenging part of your physical recovery after it? Was the skin grafts and waiting on all of your body, the patchwork to heal so you could move again?
The most challenging was the skin grafts, and I'll get into that in a minute, but I also, whenever the sheet stuck to my back and they pulled that off, and I guess I screamed like a baby. I don't know. My sister said so. I don't even remember it.
Yeah, checked out.
I do remember. While I was there, I heard a lot of screaming. Actually, from the floor above me. And
all the way from the floor above you.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I asked the nurse. I said, "What in the world is going on up there?" And she said that a young man had come home and his parents had been drinking and smoking cigarettes, and someone flipped a cigarette over onto the bed that he was sleeping on, and it was just smoldering. And he come in and he jumped on the bed and belly down and took it, almost all of his skin completely off.
Oh my gosh.
He was, anyway, burns are, people don't understand burns and how painful they can be. It's not like a cut. Whenever you're burned, it's your whole arm or your whole hand, or in my case, 90% of my body. And the pain just doesn't go away right away. It's just there. And it kind of messes with your head a little bit because you can't get away from it. Like I said, the right arm was not as painful as my left arm because all the skin was gone off of it. My left arm had mostly second degree burns, and they come in about the second day, and they began cleaning me up, which was in itself quite painful because the gasoline that had ignited left black all over me, and that black had to be taken off because that's carbon. And so they had to go in there with cloths and wipe all of that black off my face, off my arms. So you got this burn, and it hurts by itself, and then you've got somebody that's rubbing that burn. God. Now, I know some people may be listening to this that has been burnt and understands what's going on here, but it's kind of excruciating pain. And then they start what they call debriding. And whenever they debride, they go in there to all those great big second-degree burn bubbles, and they bust the bubble, and they cut all of the skin off. And whenever that happens, now the bubble is not there, so you got that skin that's open to the air, and that starts to hurt more. And I had 3 IVs in me at one time, and for whatever reason they decided that they needed to pull the IVs out. Why, I don't know, but they pulled the IVs out, and they had 3 of them in me because my body was taking so much liquid to blow up the bubbles. And
does your body do that to try to cool off?
Pardon?
Does it try to do that to cool off, forming all the bubbles and the blisters?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
It's actually there to protect your skin.
Gotcha.
Underneath.
Okay.
But they didn't realize how extensive my burns were. They were just looking at the 2nd degree and the 4th degree burns, but they had an IV in my left arm, and whenever they pulled the IV out, they pulled the tape off. Whenever they pulled the tape off, they pulled a whole layer of skin off.
Oh my God.
And then the next day, they was trying to give me another IV.
Mind you, this is not a burn care hospital.
No,
they don't know what they're doing.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Right.
Thanks for putting it in there. Yeah, it's not a burn hospital.
Yeah.
It was just a general hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the closest one they could get me to.
Right.
And after they had pulled all the IVs out, about 6, 7, 8 hours later, they decided they need to get another one in there. And they couldn't hit my veins because the bubbles were taking the liquid out of my body so fast that my veins were collapsing. So they called a OBGYN doctor down, and I'll never forget this. They figured that I had enough pain medication in me that they didn't need to numb my ankle, and so they cut my ankle open to find the vein to stick the IV in it, and then they sewed it up, and that was kind of a shock.
Wow.
That was kind of a shock.
I wonder if that's why your veins roll now.
Don't know.
You know, thinking about whenever you were at Barnes recently and they were doing all these IVs and the nurses were having a hell of a time because they kept wanting to roll. And I wonder if just from your burn and all the trauma that your veins sustained at an early age, they toughened up. Like,
I hadn't even thought about that.
You're
That's
not getting in
possible.
here, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting awareness. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but yeah.
Yeah.
God. So you had a vein or an IV in your ankle.
In my ankle.
Wow.
Yep, sure enough. And that they put that in and left it there as the only IV because they were then afraid to put any tape on me.
Right.
So
Gosh.
that was kind of a shock. But as I started to heal, they wanted me to be up and around and moving, and which I did. Mm-hmm. I was glad to look into the mirror and see all the black gone, but after I saw all the black gone, one thing that I discovered was all the scars.
Right.
And at that time, I never even thought about the 5D world. I didn't even know it existed. Even though it guided my life, I didn't even know it existed. And in the 3D world, you're always worried about, are you too fat? Are you too skinny? Are you pretty for other people?
Vanity.
Vanity.
Yeah.
Vanity, exactly.
How
vanity.
this meat suit that we wear, how it is received by everybody around us.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing about the 3D world. We are what we see, and what I saw was not pretty, to say the least. And looking down and seeing that, it was a harsh reality that that's the way it's going to be from now on.
Permanent.
It's not a temporary thing like a little cut on your finger. It's a whole lot of stuff. And so it was hard to adjust to.
I can't imagine.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't. A lot of people ask me, "Oh, did you have PTSD?"
Mm-hmm.
And from the hearing of the flame igniting and coming towards me and getting burned and all that kind of stuff. I don't have any PTSD at all. It's just in my mind, it's just something that happened.
Well, and then you went and, I was thinking about that just yesterday. Again, I was reminded you went into that as a career. You went into the petroleum industry. I mean, you were, a technician. And as you were talking to me about making repairs to your RV yesterday, and you were talking about the motherboard, and, it's got to, for the gas to ignite, and you're talking about, there's got to be this particular thing, it has to happen, so the switch will go here and there, and all this. And as you were talking about that, I was thinking in my mind, like, wow, like you have since early on been very much aware of how the ignition process works.
Yeah, very much. I worked in Bell, Missouri for a short period of time, helping them out, and with propane loading racks, when they close the valve, there's a certain amount of propane in between that's got to be bled off, and they bleed that off to a flare, and this flare will burn that off, and then they can take their hose loose. Well, without that flare, you can't load propane. And the flare went down, and I went over there to work on it. And whenever I got it working, one of the guys at the load rack had already opened up his valve, and it wasn't quite working yet. And propane is heavier than air. So whenever he opened his valve, the propane went over to the flare, dropped down from the flare because the propane is heavier, about the same time I was able to get it to ignite. And all around me, this was in the wintertime, and fortunately I had myself bundled completely up except for my face, and this propane ignited and burned all my eyelashes off, burned my mustache off.
I remember. You came home because you would go to work wearing Nomex. Nomex. Which is an anti-inflammable, what is it, flame retardant? That's right. And I remember you coming home that day. I don't remember how old I was. I was probably a teenager. And you had no eyebrows. You were... And I remember thinking then, like, gosh, like, to put yourself back into the same environment that you experienced back in 68?
67.
67. Yeah, that's right. 11 years old. So yeah. And it just it fascinated me. So I would say like you leaned into that fear. Like that's maybe why you don't have as much PTSD around it, because you leaned in and you started to better understand it.
Yeah.
And what else? I don't know. I can't speak for you, but
Yep.
Wow. So pain. I mean, like
they kept me on pain medication, although the pain medication didn't eliminate the pain. It cut it down to where you could tolerate it. It was kind of like a sunburn.
How long did that last?
That lasted about 6 weeks, and I was in the hospital for 8 or 9 weeks. I was in hospital just over 2 months the first time. And my left arm, there was a web that grew underneath my left arm, kind of like if you was to think about opening your hand completely up and your thumb away from your index fingers real wide. There's a little web there. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I had. I had a web that come down on the back of my arm, and it kept me. I couldn't even raise my arm up even with my shoulder. And so I was taking therapy for that. And this guy, Fred Turner, it was his name. I'll never forget his name. His name was Fred Turner. And Fred Turner was trying to help me raise my arm, and he said, well, just go up next to the door there. And he says, just with your fingers, crawl up the door with your fingers and try and get that to stretch. So I'm over there doing that, and he reaches over and puts his thumbs underneath each of my shoulders and just pushes me up against the door. And whenever he did that, he tore that web, not all the way, but he tore the web, about an inch of it. It was about 3 inches long in depth, and he tore about an inch of it. And that was aggravating, to say the least. And that's when they decided that something needed to be done other than therapy.
Yeah, and scar tissue doesn't have the same elasticity as regular tissue.
That's exactly right. It's a scar.
It's a scar. It doesn't have the same properties. You can't treat it the same.
There's no blood flow to it.
Wow.
And they decided that.
How old were you when that happened?
I just turned 12 because my birthday's in April.
Yeah.
So I just turned 12, and they decided that I needed to go in and have that web area cut out. That comes to graft number 2. And they went in, and they didn't tell me they was going to graft it. I just thought they was just going to cut it out of there.
Oh my.
And they cut that out, and in order to keep my arm still so that the graft would grow, they had my right arm up where my hand was on top of my left shoulder, and they had it all taped down so it couldn't move. Well, whenever they did that, they actually popped my shoulder out of socket. And I come out of the surgery, and the only thing I could think of is, why is my leg hurting so bad? I don't understand this. Well, they had taken skin off my leg, which they didn't tell me they was going to do.
Wow.
And used it
That's
for
the square
the graft.
patch on your leg. Yeah.
That's that graft, that skin where it's, and that's something that hurts almost more than just a cut, because all that skin is pulled loose. Mm. But I had to be like that for 3 weeks with my shoulder out of socket for 3 weeks. And I was in the hospital again for 3 more weeks. And fortunately, whenever they unbundled it and everything, it was, my shoulder went back into socket. The skin graft had held. It's not, they don't all hold. You got to redo them sometimes.
So that's a blessing.
And yeah, that was a blessing. But then when I went home, used to be, I don't know, some of your viewers may remember Ma Bell telephone.
Okay.
And Bell Telephone, before they were split up, they were nice enough for free to run a telephone line into our trailer. We had a trailer right next to our house while they was rebuilding the house. Mm-hmm. And that was my school. There was another one inside the schoolroom, classroom.
So you were like OG homeschool learning, like pre-COVID, way pre-COVID.
Way pre-COVID. Way pre-COVID.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I was able to, the teacher told me, she says, now, they called me Bobby. They said, now, Bobby, if you need to talk, you just push the button and talk. Don't worry about if anybody's else is talking. Mm-hmm. You just talk, and we'll wait for you. So I said, all right. So at first I was kind of scared to do that, and then I got a little bolder and a little bit bolder. And,
yeah.
And it was.
You're a little boy after all.
Yeah, yeah. And I was able to interact with everybody.
Good.
And
that just gave me goosebumps to feel included in your class, finally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was able to get into the class, and I caught up very quickly. The reason why I couldn't go is because whenever that sheet was pulled off my back, it pulled into the skin off my back where there was muscle showing, and it took a long time for that to heal. They decided that it wouldn't be beneficial to graft it because the graft couldn't grow to skin that was already burned. It can only grow to skin that's not burnt. Or so
muscle tissue.
So it just had to heal. And I couldn't go to school because of that. Okay,
and for those who aren't aware of what we're talking about, he did talk about this sheet incident in the last episode. Excruciating. So yeah, you just had a time.
Yeah.
Time was the only thing that was going to heal that.
And that was when I had my first girlfriend.
Wow.
Her name was Mindy.
Mindy.
And
Aww.
Mindy just loved me. And she was so sweet.
That's sweet.
But yeah, that was quite the deal. Then as time went on, I was working a job that overdeveloped my forearm.
And this is, how old were you now at this point? Because
I was 20 at this time.
Okay, so we're fast forwarding.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was overdeveloping, and they had to do what's called a z-plasty. They take the skin and they move it around so that the scar is separate from it's hard to explain.
Right.
Verbally.
Well, plus this is years ago too, so who knows what kind of technologies exist today that didn't back in the day. I mean, do they do those types of procedures, z-plasties and stuff anymore? Do you know?
Yeah, they do.
They do? Okay.
They sure do.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, about 20 years ago, when the job that I was doing was wiring, and whenever I would wire, I'd have to put my arm straight forward, and sometimes I'd have to raise it up. So I went to the doctor and asked him if he could fix that. Mm-hmm. And he did what's called a multiple z-plasty. He did 7 z-plasties.
Oh, is that when it looked like, I mean,
yep.
Let's call it what it looks like, a shark bite?
Yeah, it looked like a shark bite.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
sure
that's
did.
where they went in and they just almost like put little spacers in the scar tissue. So in between, so I can and I can describe it to maybe from a perspective of viewing it and remembering when it was done, is there's imagining this web of scar tissue, and then they go in and take like about every inch or about every half an inch,
About 2 inches, yeah.
and put in like a little gusset. Almost like if you think about pants that you wear that has an extra gusset in the crotch to where you can get more space to move your legs.
Yep.
It's a similar, it looked very similar, except in your case, because it was human flesh and the way it was so symmetric, going up this web of skin. There was how many of them? 3, 4, 7. You said that 7.
Yep.
So yeah, and it looked like a shark had bitten you, and those were the shark teeth, where they scraped. That was wild. I do remember that. And so you were able to get more movement.
I was able to get more movement, but what I described to the doctor that I needed, the movement that I needed, he didn't resolve with the z-plasties. And whenever I went in to talk to him about it, I said, you didn't do what I wanted you to do. And he said, well, what are you talking about? And I explained it to him and showed him. He goes, okay. He says, well, I can fix that. And I was like, I don't want to pay for this. Yeah. He goes, no problem. He says, it won't cost you anything. Wow. So, and I'll just be honest with everybody. I said, I don't want to hurt. He goes, okay, that's not a problem. And he went in and he did 4 more of the grafts.
The grafts, okay.
And down my arm, and he literally cut as deep as he could cut. There was holes that were like an inch and a half deep, and he cut all the way into the scar that was in the muscle, because the muscle was scarred, and packed it with gauze and wrapped it all up, and he put me on a morphine drip. And I think this is kind of where I got really addicted to drugs,
narcotics,
to opioids.
Yeah.
This thing had, every hour would give me 5 milligrams of morphine, and there was a button you could push and you can get more. And whenever you get that way, you push the button every chance you get.
Yeah.
And I got where I couldn't breathe.
Wow.
And I told the nurse, I said, unhook this. I said, I can't breathe. She said, just keep breathing. Just keep breathing. Just keep breathing. And I said, call a doctor. She said, anyway, it was 2 days of that. And when I come out, I was quite addicted to opioids. That was not a good feeling.
That's why those types of drugs are
dangerous.
They're dangerous, and they should be given under, specific management.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that you don't do that to yourself, because it happens. I mean, were there any other things besides, the pain meds? Like, did you start to develop some strategies to rely on for dealing with the pain? I mean, so then you heal from this other surgery 20 years later, or I guess this was about 20 years ago, roughly.
Yeah.
Like, was that became your go-to, didn't it? Kind of alcohol
it became my go-to. Yeah. I would drink to escape the pain that I was having, and then I started going to a pain management clinic, and they started me on opioids right out of the chutes. As a matter of fact, I say right out of the chutes, I had some problems with my upper back, and they give me some injections in my upper back, and it took care of my upper back. It was no problem. But my lower back, I had some back surgeries earlier, and we'll talk about that later. But the back surgeries, the injections couldn't get all the way to where it needed to be because of the scars from the back surgery. And so the doctor he says, well, all I can do is just give you opioids.
Yeah.
And he says, what kind you want?
Yeah.
And I said, methadone. So they put me on methadone. And for those that don't know what methadone is, that's what you give someone that's coming off of heroin. And it's basically a synthetic heroin. And I took that for years and years. And
that's when you kind of started to go away.
I started to go away.
I remember that.
I started to go away. I started losing myself.
You started losing yourself.
I got caught up in the chemical and addiction life.
Mm-hmm. Trying to quiet the pain teacher.
Quiet the pain teacher, as Paul Chek would say.
Mm-hmm. Pain
teacher.
Yep.
I was quieting the pain teacher instead of listening to the pain teacher. Yeah. And as the government cut back on what kind of opioids and how many opioids you could take, they started cutting back on the opioids, and whenever they cut back on the opioids, I started increasing with the alcohol.
Right.
So that was a whirlwind by itself. We might talk about that later if you want to.
Yeah, we can. We can get into that later. So, did you feel like you had a good support system other than chemical support?
For the burns, I really didn't. I had my family.
Yeah, did you ever go through any like emotional therapy?
No.
Because I mean there's the outside, but then there's all of this stuff on the inside from a little boy age 11 right before hormones and puberty's getting ready to hit.
Yep.
None. No therapy.
No therapy.
No mental therapy.
No therapy at all.
Yeah.
I don't know if they didn't believe in it back then or what the deal was.
Right. Right.
My therapy actually become I'd go out in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Nature.
Yeah.
And there was this creek, and this creek had trees on both sides, and it was just a beautiful little creek. And I used to go up and down that creek a lot. And I noticed a burrow. I wonder what's in that burrow. And so I had my dad get me a trap. And I got this trap, and I set it next to the opening of the burrow. I wanted to see what it was that was in there. Mm-hmm. I was a curious little boy.
Of course you are.
And lo and behold, the next day when I got back over there was a fox in the trap.
Oh, was it still alive?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, he was still alive. And I took him home, and we played with it at home. Me and my brother. My brother was about 4 or 5 years old at the time, Russell. And we played with this little fox, and we thought it was a dog, because it looked like a dog.
Like a dog.
And suddenly he started getting where he would snap at us.
Yeah, he's like, going out of here.
Yeah. And my dad said, we can't have this. We can't have this. So we took this little fox to a place called the Little Red Schoolhouse. The Little Red Schoolhouse was a place out in nature, in forest preserves, and they had all kinds of snakes and turtles and things like that. And we took that fox to the Little Red Schoolhouse. And oddly enough, when I got married, my wife and I wanted to take Marilyn to the Little Red Schoolhouse so she could see where I took the fox. Well, the ground tinsman had a wheelbarrow, and on top of that wheelbarrow was this little red fox. And it caught my attention, obviously, and I said, "Where'd you get that fox?" He goes, "Somebody brought that fox in here about 15 years ago. He had caught him in a trap." And I was like, oh my God.
Wow.
That was me. That's the fox that I caught.
Oh my God.
He was still alive, and he was on top of the wheelbarrow, and then they was playing with him, and he lost that nasty temperament.
Uh-huh.
And people could play with him and pet him. So yeah, that was my therapy. My therapy was nature.
Nature, yeah.
Nature.
Well, and let's be honest, for most children it is. I mean, when we're, those young souls, we gravitate toward being close to the planet and the trees and the birds and the animals and all of those things still try to talk to us and communicate with us.
Yeah.
Even as adults, we have to put ourselves back into that, that childlike mind and let ego step aside and be still and present enough to listen.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. So, I mean, looking on your scars and stuff, like, how did your perception of your scars change over time? Were there moments of acceptance? Like, because you had girlfriends, like you had, like, I think about, like, if I gain 20 pounds, I feel, my vanity, my ego, my, all of these things in my own body start to get all dysregulated, and so, like, how did you cope with the fact that, okay, this is me?
I wore long sleeve shirts all the time. Yeah. The right side of my face was burnt worse than my left side, but relatively quickly, thank the Lord, relatively quickly the pink went away, and you could barely see it. My ear was burned pretty good, but you could barely see it. But the really noticeable thing was my arm and back. So I would always wear long sleeve shirts. It didn't make any difference. It could be 98 degrees outside. I'd have a long sleeve shirt on, and that was cumbersome in itself.
I bet.
I had a friend in Orland Park, where I lived at the time. I had they had the classes split up into different groups. Now they don't do that today. Everybody gets a trophy. Doesn't make a difference how well they play. But back then they had 7th grade, because I went from 6th grade to 7th grade. They had 7-1, 7-2, 7-3, all the way up to 7-6. And they put me in 7-6, which was the highest developmental ones. And there was a boy there named Larry Ludwig. And I didn't mean anything by it. I was just cutting up, and I said, Larry Leadhead. Well, it offended him. And he started calling me Burnt Man from Alcatraz. And
kids can be so.
Boy, that was a shock, you know. But when I look back at it, though, it desensitized me. It desensitized me about my burns, because I had to just buck it up, because I called him Larry Leadhead. And so it actually helped me more than anything. When I was I could kind of get away with things that most people couldn't get away with.
Sympathy. The sympathy card.
Sympathy card. I played the sympathy card.
Yep.
I did.
Yep.
I did. I'll not lie to anybody about that.
Yeah. Coping mechanism.
Yeah. We would, in this one class, we would take the center of our Bic pens out, and it made a beautiful spitball shooter. Mm. And we was having spitball fights, and everybody dared me to shoot the teacher.
Of course you did.
And I thought, wow, man, I don't know about this. And everybody said, come on, man, shoot her. I dare you. So I rolled up a little piece of gum because it would shoot straighter. And I was going to shoot her in the back of the head.
And it gets stuck in her hair.
That's where I was going to shoot her. But about the time I shot, she turned around and hit her right smack dab in the forehead.
Oh, no.
And she just kind of jumped. And when she did, she pointed, she goes, you, and you. She pointed out the people that were shooting spitballs because she knew who it was.
Yeah.
We were so ignorant.
Right.
We just never even thought about it,
Right.
And so every one of us had to write a letter to our parents that we're the ones that hit her with the spitball.
Right.
And I said, don't make these kids do that. I'm the one that shot you. I did. I owned up. I said, I'm the one that shot you. I was playing that sympathy card, hoping that she would. Nope.
No.
Everyone had to write a letter.
Yeah.
So I brought.
Well, but they were antagonizing you though too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that was their role in it, and that was very,
that's true.
Valiant of you to try to take it all, but and good for you for owning it up though. I think that's part of the issue with a lot of situations. Like, gosh, if we would just own up to what we did and like, okay, now can we just move forward?
Yeah. I brought that letter home, and my dad read that letter, and he was quiet for a couple seconds, and then he looked up at me. He says, "Good shot."
Oh my God, Grandpa.
And then he goes, and then he says, "Don't you ever do that again." I said, "Dad, I will never do that again. I promise you." But it was interesting. That was one of the first, in 7th grade, was one of the first times that I experienced the 5D world, but I didn't realize it. The teacher, like I said, I was in 7th, 6th, which is the mostly all advanced students. And she drew a boat on a piece of paper. And she said, I want everybody to think of a white sheet. Clear your mind. Nothing but a white sheet. Clear your mind. She kept saying that. And then she says, what am I looking at? And she was looking at that boat. And I drew a boat. And it flabbergasted her. And ever since then, I was like, wow, I mean, I've seen that boat. How could I see that boat? And it amazed me because I didn't know that the 5D world was out there.
Right, in those terms.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, how in the world could that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I went from 3D to 5D in just 1 year.
Mm-hmm. Like, this is awareness that it's there, but then what do you do with it if it's not nurtured?
Yeah, I didn't do anything with it.
Yeah. Yep. If it's
couple years later, I got to finding out that what I thought about and knew I would do would happen. Timmy Halp, boy next door, him and I had bows and arrows, and we was shooting things, trying to shoot birds and whatever. And I got kind of, I'll say it, cocky.
Cocky. Mm-hmm.
And I said, shoot your arrow in the air, Tim. I said, I'll shoot it and break it in half. And he shot it, and I didn't aim, nothing. I just knew that I was going to hit his arrow. And I hit his arrow and I broke it in half. And whenever that happened, I remembered back with the boat.
Oh.
And I started thinking, there's something to this.
Yeah.
And that's really when I started thinking that there was something to it, but I didn't know what it was there was something to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that was very enlightening.
Yeah, clearly, if you still remember that, you know, from all these years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that was kind of more one of the, like a specific lesson or realization that you took with you, like moving forward? Like, this
absolutely.
Is possible? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you think that also like helped you cope and deal with the scarring and the mental aspect of things, like trying to shift?
It did. It allowed me to look inside of myself instead of outside of myself. There was other things that happened. I can't bring to memory, but there was other things that happened, and it did kind of bring me away from the 3D world a little bit, knowing that there was something out there that I didn't know what it was.
Kept you curious.
Made me curious.
Yeah. And that's where we need to always stay, is curious.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of like all the signs that we put around your hospital room up at Barnes.
Absolutely.
What else is possible?
And my motorhome now.
Yeah, what's right about this that I'm not getting? There's always.
Whose thought is it?
Yeah, where's it coming from?
Yep.
Well, have you had opportunities? I mean, gosh, so here we are, fast forward, 68 years old. You've had a lot of life. You've had a lot of things that have happened, and we'll get into more of those stories with future episodes. But have you been able to really ever deeply connect with other burn victims?
Yes, I did. I sure did.
And share stories, kind of like war veterans, right? I mean,
yeah. One particular one that I know very well, it touched me deeply. Me and my wife and I, Marilyn, we went to this. She was volunteering at the hospital, do things at the hospital, play with babies, carry babies, hold babies. And the hospital had a dinner. We're going to go. If anybody doesn't understand 3D, 5D world, listen to what's fixing to happen here. We go to this dinner. It's a banquet. And there was probably 200 people there. There's probably 30, 40 tables, maybe more. And I look around, and there's this table that had 2 chairs. And there was more. I mean, there was other ones out there, but this one particular table had 2 chairs. And I thought, something made me say, that's where we're going to go. So we go and we sit down. I sit down, and I look next to me, and there was this woman. And I could tell she was pulling a scarf, I guess you call it, up on her shoulders, and they would slide down, and then she pulled it back up. Bear in mind, whenever you're burned, the scars are really slippery. There's no hair to hold. And it kept slipping down. And I looked over and I noticed some scars. And then I looked at her hands and I seen some scars. And I just turned to her and I said, I noticed you're burned.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's what I would want somebody to do to me.
Yep.
I would rather them ask me, because if you ask somebody, you're going to help them. You're going to help them get through something, just like a support group.
Sometimes just finding your voice to speak about it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And she said, yeah. She says, I was living down in Branson, and my husband and I, our house caught on fire. My husband didn't make it out. She says, I made it out, and I've had extensive burns all over my body. Well, then I went kind of looked a little bit, you know, 'cause she had burns on her legs, she had burns on her hands, she had burns on her shoulders. Mm-hmm. Her face wasn't affected. And so we talked. We talked about what we went through. We talked about how she coped with it. And her husband had died, like, I don't know, 5 years earlier. And she was working in a burn center. Mm. And because she needed to talk about it. Yeah. And he was able to talk about it. Now think about this. Of all the places that I could have sat in that banquet, I was led to that chair next to her.
Do you feel like it helps you to talk about it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was comforting. It was comforting to meet somebody that had extensive burns, and they've learned to cope with it, and I could relate to them. Yeah. And so it was like talking to somebody that went through something that I went through and knows what I dealt with. Mm-hmm. It was very, very comforting.
Mm-hmm. Instant connection, I'm sure.
Huh?
Instant connection.
Oh, it was instant connection. Mm-hmm. Instant. It was almost an instant connection when I seen her pulling her shawl or whatever.
Yeah, because you understand, you have empathy for that.
Yeah.
You know exactly what that feels like, trying to cover up and wear long sleeves so that people don't see your arms. And
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow. Do you have any advice for burn victims that might be listening or might eventually tune in for how to, you know, maybe somebody who's currently going through recovery or, you know, any aspect of it?
I've met several burn people. One fella was on his roof, and while he was on his roof, he was working on his roof and reached up and hit a power line, and it burned both of his arms off.
Oh my God.
And I was able to talk with him, and because I was burnt and knew somewhat what he went through, I just asked him what happened. Mm-hmm. And he just opened right up. And the 2 bits worth of information there is, rather than looking at somebody and wondering what happened to them, talk to them, ask them. It's a whole lot easier to explain something than it is to be looked at like a freak. Yeah. So, yeah, that would be my advice to somebody. And I think that goes with people that have lost a limb, lost an eye.
Well, and those are things that you can physically see in the 3D realm, you know, and that's, so like I want to add to that and say, I was blessed with an opportunity recently, you know, a very intentional way to bring in the new year this year, and surrounded myself with 16 other people from all different walks of life, connecting in a very intimate space. Yeah. And being vulnerable and sharing personal stories and setting intentions for the new year. And in our vulnerability, you realize that you never know what's going on in somebody else's life. And we're all, no matter what background we have, what our walk of life is,
we've all got something.
Right. We've all got something, and some of that stuff isn't going to be visible in the scars that we wear on the on the outside of our body. Sometimes those are going to be something that we wear more internally, and it causes us to have maybe this weird quirky behavior, or this this OCD moment, or this avoidant attachment style, or whatever, this fear.
It molds our look at life.
It really, really does. And until we're able to have that compassion and be able to use our voice and ask and just start a conversation, we won't ever know.
Which gets into the 5D world.
Right.
We mold ourselves in the 3D world by things that happen, and how we react to it is indulging into the 5D world.
If you allow, if you allow yourself to let go,
and kind of aware.
Right. Kind of like whenever, our trip to St. Louis, we could have got really upset. We could have got really fearful, really angry. Here it is, 7:00 at night, and we're stuck in St. Louis, and
snow's on the way.
Snow's on the way. What are we gonna do? And you and I both kept okay, everything happens for a reason. Everything is exactly as it's supposed to be. This is happening for us.
That's right.
And we found all kinds of things that were right about the situation, but it takes that mental pivot to kind of look away from how you would normally respond to your environment.
Exactly.
Take that pause, go within. Makes me want to drink my cacao right now. Go within.
We had a chance to meet Steve.
Yeah.
The Uber driver.
Yeah, Steve. Yeah.
And play
trivia.
Trivia, yeah.
Which we've realized we're not super fast at. We were getting answers right, but not very quickly. So we won't be on a speed trivia team anytime soon. But we learned some things even in our trivia game. So, and
it's all good.
Thank you for sharing so much about all this, Dad. I know that it's a lot. It's a lot to talk about, and and as it always happens, we are right at the 1 hour mark, so it's a perfect kind of way to segue. Is there anything else that you might want to share or say anything to the listeners or burn victims or anybody that is maybe looking for someone to talk to about it or how to move forward? Are there organizations locally or that advocate for
I'm sure there
counseling?
are.
We'll have to look into that and put it in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll have to do that. Because of the fact that I've gotten used to it, I am what I am. Mm-hmm. I don't even think about it anymore. I'll
talk to my friend Uli. I think I mentioned to you, he's a good friend of mine who retired from the fire department, and he has a podcast too. Uli Who is the name of his podcast, and I bet he would have some insight as to
great.
Organizations or people that might want to just know that you exist, and that if they need someone to talk to about, harrowing story.
Always remember, the 3D world isn't where you really live.
Yeah.
You live upstairs in your mind.
It's a beautiful place to end on, Dad, right there. Thank you. All right, listeners, thank you again for tuning in to ForResting the Soul with Christy, and this will conclude our third episode titled The Fire, sitting here with my dad, Robert Peterson. And I'll put some notes down in the show notes. We'll see if we can't find some local organizations or maybe some national organizations that exist for the purpose of providing support for burn victims and And we'll get that posted if I can find something. And then, yeah, if you would like to have a cup of cacao too, I want to mention, I'll put a link down in the show notes for that. I'm drinking Keith's cacao. It is by far my favorite. So if you would like to order some and get a 15% discount for your first order, you can find the link down in the notes. Otherwise, just be cognizant of that 3D versus 5D reality that we live in, and maybe ask yourself the ways that you can start to gravitate more toward that 5D realm. Get yourself out of this three-dimensional world that we sometimes seem to be stuck in. Until then, you guys, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will be back next week with episode 4, ForResting the Soul with Christy. Take care.